Hello, everyone. I'm Joel Ludlow. This is Evolution Jeet Kune. I am joined today by Ed Monaghan, and I'm going to try to get through some of our very long history. I first met Ed back in 1997, and my first question is going to be about that. Hopefully, the plan is to use some of our shared history over these many years as a jumping off point for Ed to share his journey and his insight on being an artist. And I'm not giving a full introduction like I usually do because he's got like 4 or 5 hats as an artist, and hopefully you'll get all of that through what we're doing. Ed, thank you so much for being on here. When I first met you, it was at UCLA, where you are still professor of stage combat at the theater, film, and television department at UCLA. It's where I graduated from. I had to audition to get in there. How did you become a professor at UCLA? Let's go into that one.
Sure. Hey, it's good to see you, Joel. And always a pleasure to talk with you, being one of my 2 first black belts in LA. So, the history is quite extensive, as you say. So it's really good to see you and continue to connect and to have that shared history. So with UCLA, I began teaching at UCLA in 1995, and am still there 28 years later. And so now what I do, I teach a variety of things. I do teach combat for stage and film. I teach Eastern philosophy, exercise science, and I work with the Mindful Awareness Research Center. And I specialize in developing protocol for kids who are clinically diagnosed with attention deficit disorders and autism, and I work with adults with post-traumatic stress disorder and addictive disorders, and also anxiety disorders. So, I've and it is important to talk about the depth and breadth of that as related to the subject matter that you're bringing up in terms of artistry, because these are all intertwined as part of the human experience. We very often compartmentalize our experiences through life and kind of segment ourselves into one lane, and they cross over. And a lot of the work that I've done is with neuroscientists at UCLA and other areas, other places. And
for everybody watching, you're going to see a lot of that. It's one of the big reasons I wanted to have Ed on here. Is you're going to see how the artistry or being an artist is going to be very broad across what you do in your life, and it's really important. So really pay attention to this. And as he goes in, sorry, Ed, I just want to make sure everybody knows how much you do have a broad spectrum as an artist coming through there.
Oh, sure. I think the main issue is that with our brains, we have to look at the overall conditioning and patterning based on environmental conditioning. And how can we best improve that function when it comes to whatever our personal dysfunctions may be, and how that ultimately impacts relationships, our ability to learn, sustain attention, etc. And one of the things that we look at is, how does the creative process come into play when being able to look at those types of different practices, and how does it help? If we look at right brain function, I mean, when you look at people, very often there's a particular bias that we express one way or another as we learn. There are different learning styles, right? We hear about that a lot. And so if you're looking at, some people are kinesthetic learners. So you've always been someone who has learned with your body. You picked up, when I started teaching you, you picked up immediately. You could mimic anything. Some people are just that way. They can pick up things. They learn from their shared environment. That's how we begin learning as kids, is we start sampling all of the sensory data that surrounds us, from crawling
Yep.
to uh, to just different forms of locomotion, and how do we kind of express ourselves physically. That's a big part of the learning process. And yeah, as we evolve and our brain matures, some people tend to be more intellectual learners. They'll process information intellectually, and they need to kind of have things presented to them verbally or conceptually. And other people are very linear learners. The folks who are great at mathematics and science. Some people are not that. That was me. I was horrible at that. It felt like it was ping pong balls bouncing off of my head when I was trying to learn that way.
I want to go into, so when I got into your, because I had to audition. So everybody, I had to audition to get into like all the classes at UCLA in the theater department. And Ed's class was no exception to that. And I remember that I auditioned and I didn't make the cut. And I was like, "Hey, Professor Monahan, I didn't get in." You were like, "Yeah, it's just about body types and matching things up. You come in, next quarter." I was like, "Well, I don't have a next quarter." And you said, "Oh, okay, well, just come on in." And that led to here. And hopefully, you're going to find out, if you don't already know this from reading my bio or something, that that's a huge, huge deal. And that was an opportunity that I was able to create by having a discussion with you. Can you think of anything where you have had a moment like that, where you maybe took advantage of an opportunity or created an opportunity on your own that propelled you as an artist or as an individual into uh, a life journey that maybe you had never expected?
Oh, many. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there one that stands
I
out
do I do wanna
top of
I
your
do
head
wanna go
today?
Yeah, absolutely. I do wanna go back to just one thing, though.
Hmm.
Kind of the point of what I was talking about last was that through, expressing oneself creatively,
Hmm.
many people, there are folks who, we refer to them as the bean counters, right? That are very dominant left brain function, that are the accountants that see things in the lanes. And then there are the people that are those people that are hyper creative, right? So that live in the land of ideas and super creative. But the problem is, when you live too much in the lanes, it's very difficult to solve problems because you have to have creativity to be able to do that. When you live in the land of creativity, it's very difficult to get things done sometimes because those people tend to just be full of ideas, but they can't do anything because they can't execute. So finding a very reasonable balance between those, that's really become my emphasis, more my work. And we see a lot of this cross patterning when it comes to dysfunctions and the inability to sustain attention. And that's where you can get really creative by, especially helping kids to be able to understand how to process information in different ways. So, that's where a lot of my interest lies. And a lot of it lies also in the realm of how does that ultimately impact families? Because it's the families that lead to the environmental conditioning that ultimately leads to emotional dysfunctions in kids. And most of the time, parents don't understand, they don't realize that they have some sort of dysfunction that's occurring that they're passing on to their children.
Yeah.
So, this is like a huge deal in terms of, what we create our children to be. And what that ultimately does is impacts our overall society as a whole, more so than anything. So that's kind of the point I wanted to make about that. Now, when you talk about, seminal moments that ultimately led to me moving down a particular path,
Yeah.
I think we can all highlight those in our life in retrospect and see, wow, that was something that shifted my direction. Um, my initial I've done martial arts since I was a kid, so that's
Mhm.
always something that's been with me. But in developing a path to follow, I was always creative, and so all the guitars behind me, that's something that's what I originally wanted to be a marine biologist. That was my initial and interest.
Ironically, I had gone in for chemical engineers. What I initially went after is we neither one of us took that direction, obviously.
Well,
Uh,
listen, you getting into UCLA was a big deal because now we have about let's see, what was the amount? I was just told this by the chair of the department. Well, I think we had,
it's a ridiculous process.
so it's
It
around
was ridiculous when
15,
I
it
came.
was around 15,000 applicants for
Yeah,
um, a couple hundred spots, basically.
yeah.
And, that narrows even more when you're talking about going into performance.
Hmm.
So speaking of that, I initially, music was my initial interest. It
Hmm.
really spoke to me, it connected with me, and that's what I wanted to do. But then when I started school, where I began at the University of Kentucky, they only had a classical program, and that was not something I was interested in. And because the theoretical component to music aligned very much with mathematics, which did not resonate with
Yeah.
me at all. So I kept playing, and I played rock, and I, played in
Well,
bands, and I did all that
that's
stuff.
one of the things. It's actually one of my questions. We're going to jump ahead of that one. So, as everybody can see, you have guitars up on the wall behind you, and I had been training with you for a while, and all of a sudden you're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, no, I play guitar." And you're like, "I'm like, okay, you play guitar." And you're like, "Oh yeah, I was," but you were a pickup artist for several bands coming through, correct?
Well, so there's a couple of things. But before I was teaching at UCLA, I started acting professionally, and so right out of school, I got guest starring gigs on a couple of series, and then did a couple of movies, and then I was cast as a series regular on a show that lasted for a couple of years. And during that process, that was one of those seminal moments that I discovered that I didn't want to do that.
Yeah,
The reason I went into theater in the first place was because music wasn't really resonating with me. And I had taken some theater classes, and I was kind of good at it, and it was fun. So that kind of turned into a pathway, and it turned into ultimately me going to grad school at UCLA, and that projected me into that world, which is what the goal that I set for myself,
yeah,
and I did it. So, but what I found was it was so oriented toward um essentially narcissism that you have to be completely self-entrenched, and it's all about you and selling you as a product, and it's this I had no idea until I got there that it was you've got to please the writer, you got to please the director, you got to please you got to get a publicist, you got to pump yourself, you got to be on in magazines, you got to be on shows, you got to be on this, you got to be on that, you got to be in the eye of the public. They got to want you. That's got to reinforce your
yeah.
storyline. They're going to write you more when the shows that and I just didn't want to have anything to do with that crap.
It goes into with me. I found because I graduated from UCLA and then I started training with you. And the original idea was, well, I want to do more because that's going to be an asset for me to be able to do more martial arts in acting. And then I realized that I enjoyed going to martial arts class more than I did auditions. And I was like, And my wife has said, I was like, oh, I was in acting and I was pretty good and whatever. She goes, yeah, you were never an actor. And I was like, whoa. She goes, no, no, you were just doing that until you found your other lane to get into.
Mhm.
And which is going to tie into some other stuff I'm going to ask a little bit later. I want to go into one more because, all right, so everybody's figuring out
But you
you
asked
have
me
a,
about the music, right? Yeah.
yeah. How did you get into it? So far, Ed is a professor, as a martial artist, absolutely. And we'll get into that deeper and deeper. And as a guitarist, as a musician, um, expressing yourself as an artist that way. And I'm going to have another follow-up question a little bit later about that as well. That's going to help you go into that.
So, yeah, I mean, I played in bands in LA and play at all the Sunset Strip clubs back in the 80s. It was super fun. I had a blast. And then it got to the point where it was serious. And I had a friend who was the drummer for Guns N' Roses, and he produced some of my songs and recorded at his studio up in the Hollywood Hills. And it was so cool because we had him, we had the bass player from Quiet Riot, we had one of the guys from Night Ranger, all these 80s bands,
Yeah.
and one of the guys in Eric Clapton's band. And so they were all playing my songs. And it turned out quite well. And so we had interest, and it was time to take it to that next step. And I sat down and had a very serious conversation with Matt. This is one of those moments, a big one actually. Matt Sorum's the guy's name. He was with the Cult, and then he played with Guns N' Roses. And I said, Matt, so what's really the deal with this stuff? I mean, what am I buying into with this? How much am I going to get paid? What's it going to look like? How much travel is involved, et cetera? And he said, well, yeah, if you're gonna probably get a deal, and when you get the deal, the money's gonna go to do the album, and then you'll end up with maybe about $1,000 a week ish, and then you're gonna be on a bus playing third fiddle to whatever band that you're touring with, and you'll be going all over the country, and you'll probably be out about 7 to 8 months out of the year. And that's going to keep going that way. And if you're lucky, you'll build a following, an audience, and then you'll get a second deal. And the record company is going to own all the music. You're not going to get any money out of that. That's all going to be you're just going to get paid like a regular employee. And I said, well, how much is that going to be? And he said, well, about $1,000. I'm like, dude, there's no freaking way. I had 2 small children, and I wasn't going to leave them and just go play rock star. And I mean, it just didn't mean that much to me. So that's when I decided to bail out on that. And simultaneously is when I was running the school in Beverly Hills, where you
Which is the one I joined, Combative Arts Academy.
Yeah. And that's, at that same time, I was still a professor at UCLA, but I just chose purposefully, no, I'm not going to go down that path.
Yeah.
Because I can always express myself. I can always play. I play all the time, and I enjoy the hell out of it, but I don't have to have anybody paying me to do it. And I just don't have to have any of the trappings of that. And listen, man, I know a bunch of guys that are out of that world that were very successful back in the 80s and 90s, and now they're struggling like hell to make a living, and they're out playing these little small clubs to 30 and 40 people, and it's very difficult living for them, and not a great living either. So boy, oh boy, and then
I think that's a great point to put up the artistry versus the reality. And what you were talking about at the very onset of balancing that right and left brain, and coming through with, hey, what's the reality? And some people just follow left brain, or I'm just going to follow right brain, and they don't have that nice harmony and mix between the two. Whereas with guitar, you were like, okay, this is a rational decision. I can keep the artistic expression of self with it without having to sacrifice my family and stability of home. And then, you're running a school, which I'm really thankful for, because my life would have been very different if you hadn't. Now I'm going to run into one of your other artistic expressions, which is French. And I got to say, you threw this one at me kind of out of the blue. So I've been training with you and with George, actually, quite a lot. And we'd been training in Savat, a ton of Savat. And then you had Nicholas Synot come in. And Nick is huge and is really fantastic. But he came in, Nick's French full contact champion, and he's French. Well, I'm from Oklahoma. I'm terrible at French. I live in Canada. It's bilingual. I'm terrible at French. So we're doing a Savat test, and I'm like, okay, so it's a fouette, and I took ballet. I was ballet, but still, it was ballet in Oklahoma, so it was still like fouette and chassé, and it was with like an Oklahoma accent. Well, then we come up and Nick is there, and you pulled out full on French on me, and we're like, "Is it coupe de bar into a revers?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're saying. Like you're saying words like I should know what you're talking about, but I don't know." Uh, and I just remember being dumbfounded because the French accent had thrown me off, which is funny. But where did you pick up French? And then how much has French played into? I'm just kind of curious about. Uh, did you have French language before and then Savate? Because you're very quite involved in Savate. Your wife Joanne, very involved in Savate. We were just talking before this about you going to France or Belgium?
Yeah, so we're going to France
You're going to
to
France.
train again with
Hmm.
the guys as the former French team lead coach, and taking a group of teenagers over there. Joanne took them over in August, and then we're going again in March. And then she's taking the same group to the World Youth Championship in Serbia in July.
Which is fantastic. How much has speaking French influenced your Savate? Or do you think it helped it? Or I guess in other ways, has speaking that other language been beneficial to you as an artist and expressing yourself?
Well,
Anything you want to add? I don't know because I don't speak French.
no worries. I mean, I began just in high school. So I started, well, I guess when I was in junior high, probably seventh grade, um, maybe a little bit earlier than that, maybe sixth grade. I can't recall. And I studied through high school.
Hmm.
Um, and then I did, I think, a year in college. I can't recall. But I got to the point where I was fluent. But of course, it goes away.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, and so now I'm super rusty because I haven't been speaking for a while. Um, but then when I go to France, couple of weeks, by the time I'm there for a couple of weeks, I start picking it up again, and I can
Yeah.
hold rudimentary conversations. So I wouldn't characterize myself as someone who is fluent at this point, um, nor any type of language expert by any stretch of the imagination. But I do find that part of language is very much like singing
Hmm.
because the tonal inflections are a big part of the dialectical training. And although while I may sound good to you when I'm saying it from someone from Paris, they're going to look at me and go, "What?" Because
Yeah.
comment because because I'm kind of butchering it. So again, it's something that eventually I'll get back to. I just haven't had the time to do it.
Uh-huh.
But that is again one of those forms of artistic expression, and I think I think it's a good thing to speak multiple languages because, particularly in America, we tend to be very
Yeah.
um, ethnocentric when it comes to kind of thinking that my space is the only space. And
I think there's some ways that, like, I know from speaking Spanish and from living in Japan and speaking rudimentary, very basic level Japanese, there are some words that just don't translate very well,
Mhm.
and the cultural assignment to those words, like, well, I can tell you that, but it makes sense when you say it in Japanese, or it makes sense when you say it in Spanish to those people because it makes sense and the inflection makes sense. But when you try to explain it in English or I guess any other language, it just doesn't translate quite as well. And I think that's an interesting thing that it doesn't go in there. I would go into a little bit of refinement of skill. This was another fun segment for me. And you'd mentioned training in Muay Thai. You've trained in a ton of martial arts. And when I say you've trained in them, I mean to like this level, not like, oh yeah, I took a course on it. It was you have expertise in it. And this one was as a young assistant instructor, I came and I had no money. We lived in LA and I was hand to mouth for everything. And you were training for something and you double booked. You were doing a personal training session with somebody and you booked with Crew Puck. And I came into the school to clean or do something, and you're like, "Hey, Joel, I double booked. Why don't you take my private with Puck?" I was like, "Yes!" Like I had no money to pay for a private session with someone of that caliber, and I was just like, "Yes, yes." And I remember going over and working with Puck, and Puck is much shorter than me and much smaller. And I was like 180 pounds, and you were like 220, 225 solid at that point. Um, and I Puck got me in a clinch and locked me down. I was just like, I cannot get out of this thing. I'm not getting out of here at all, even though I had leverage and all this. And then slowly he just sort of eased up on this clinch until I could get out. And I remember telling you afterwards, and I was like, holy shit, like Puck grabbed me and I couldn't do anything. And you go, oh yeah, he does that to me too, which just made my jaw drop because you were substantially bigger than me, which means that you were a heck of a lot bigger than Puck. And it just goes on to that refinement as an artist. He's got so much refinement in just a basic movement that where it surpasses what you might see as other more enviable attributes of size and strength. And I wonder if you want to speak anything to that as an artist, being able to express yourself, how sometimes that transcends other attributes, the artistic expression of self or the refinement of skill inside of an artistic expression. Because I would definitely say that what Crew Puck does is an artistic expression.
Absolutely. And I think that harkens back to everything that we learn in Jeet Kune Do, particularly about efficiency of movement and no wasted effort or space, and how that is not style specific.
Mhm.
Someone like Krupak, who's maybe a buck 35, being able to take somebody who's 70, 80 pounds heavier than he is and control them because he
Mhm.
has efficiency of movement, you know, says a lot for his level of expertise. But that's why, you know, in training with Sifu Jerry, and I'm sure you know anybody who watches this is going to know that reference. Everything was about efficiency. Everything
Mhm.
was about economy of motion. And you know, if you look at any artist who is expressing themselves, there's a degree of expertise, of virtuosity that yields a very high level of efficiency. You know, if you look at like guitar players like Yngwie
Yep.
Malmsteen, you know, this guy is, you know, kind of a neoclassicist who turned the electric guitar world upside down. And his picking, his movements are just so tiny, so small, and his hands just
Yeah.
run over the fretboard.
And
It's
they make it look super easy
yeah,
because I think to them it is so simple, which goes into the Jeet Kune Do thing. It's simple to them, and that's the profoundness of, well, everybody should be able to do that. You see a dancer, you see a musician, and everybody goes, well, I can do that, except we can't because we don't have that time put in. We don't have that cultivated talent and skill.
that's
uh,
exactly it. And that's the operative term, time.
mhm.
It's time and practice that has to be put into it. So, yeah, I'll give you an example. Like this guitar
Mhm.
was given to me by Zach Wild.
Uh-huh.
And Zach Wild is Ozzy Osbourne's guitarist, and he's been in a band called Black Label Society for years and years and years. And his son is in our school, and
Oh, nice.
I see him all the time. And we've talked a lot about this because he's a huge Bruce Lee fan,
Mhm.
and it kind of goes back to his self discipline because this guy is on those guitars hours on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And his level, I mean, he's considered to be one of the greatest electric guitar players in the world, but he puts the time in. I mean, he
Yeah.
has a natural talent, but he cultivated that through rigid self-discipline that it
Hmm.
continues every single day. And when you see someone like Bruce Lee, there was a natural God-given talent, but an
But then it's
obsessive,
cultivated.
compulsive discipline to cultivate that, which led to the optimal circumstances for this person to completely alter the course of martial arts in the world.
Hmm.
So you can see ultimately the impact that has when you match someone who has that level of natural talent.
Hmm.
But that doesn't people squander that constantly. You'll have
Yeah.
talent in whatever area, but they're too damn lazy to do anything with it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's something that people miss as an artist is how much, and I've been influenced by and been fortunate to talk to a ton of artists, uh, and including yourself, but it's always, yes, there is talent, but there's always the time put in cultivating that talent. So we referenced Sifu had referenced Jerry Petit, and I met. We were both full instructors under Jerry Petit. I met Jerry through Ed. I met almost all the people I've trained with in the martial arts world. There are a few exceptions. My wrestling background, the Aikido instructors I trained with in Japan, but I think most of the rest of them I met because of Ed. All my introductions came through him. Jerry Petit being one of them, which leads into the 2003 Bruce Lee Foundation thing, where Ed sort of culminated uh, being a performer, being a martial artist, being a public speaker, and being a teacher and being an educator. I kind of came up with all those, as was normal for us. He said, "Okay, Joel, you're just going to come up and just throw a big old right punch." And I was like, "Okay." I did have all gear on, and Ed, you were up speaking up on this raised stage. It was a metal stage, and everybody was kind of off in the seating, but they weren't really paying attention. Kind of everybody just chatting, 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 and you were talking, and then were saying something about doing that, which was my cue to come flying in with big punch. To which you turned around and did a series of punches, and then wah, 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 and then threw me on the ground, which I did a great big break fall on those metal stages. It was a huge big boom. And then you calmly turned around after kicking the crap out of me and went back to my, as you can see, and went right into it. And do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah. And so that kind of goes into that flow. And I'm going to jump ahead of myself in my questions, but you're already touched into it. So the flow of being an artist and how you flow from one thing to the next and how they stem from each other. And one artistic expression just goes into the next one and helps build upon it, I guess. I don't know if you wanted to share something from that. I put a really brief thing on there because I just want to give you a jumping off point as that being a moment where you were mixing multiple, what other people would consider multiple expressions that might be divided, but they're all part of you as an artist and just how you express and how you're able to just shift from this to that to the other as you go through it. If you wanted to share something on that.
Well, there's a book that John Little compiled about Bruce Lee called An Artist of Life or The Artist of Life or something like that. And um, I think that encapsulates everything that you're referencing. The point being that living is a creative process,
Mhm.
and we confine ourselves to a static existence many times. And I think that's what Bruce Lee was really opposing as well. That's why get rid of belts. That's why get rid of everything on the written page because it dies. It's not that it's wrong to have something on the page written. It's just that you have to understand the context,
Mhm.
and that when you're tied and bound by that, then you lose the essence of living creatively. So being able to find that flow state, that's something people talk an awful lot about now, flow state. And, this is akin to um, living in the presence of the Tao,
Mhm.
living in the essence of emptiness. These are all synonymous terms. I mean, that's what I've spent my life doing, is studying comparative religions and philosophy. And that's, once you realize that there are commonalities, and that it's this individual, it's this dance as
Yep.
beings that we play. That's kind of the point. We exist not to just be miserable, but to express ourselves and to enjoy this existence. And of course, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. We're going to have this wonderful roller coaster ride. But, a friend of mine, I can't remember what the quote is from, but I think it's Hunter Thompson. He said, the point of life is to, eke every possible experience
Absolutely.
to the nth degree. And then when you reach the end of your life, you should skid into the grave sideways, screaming, "Wow, what a ride!"
Yeah.
Instead of
And
just this meek, docile existence.
it's funny. I remember Jerry saying to me, he was sharing something that he was talking about Bruce. Jerry was writing down some notes once, and Bruce looked over his shoulder and goes, "That's dead. Once you
Mhm.
put it on the page, it's dead." And then that into a whole philosophy of what you were just relating, of if you get so stuck on what's on the piece of paper, then you're stuck in that instead of realizing that it's supposed to be about the life and being out there. Um, briefly, which goes into I'm just going to gloss over this one. I'm going to go in the next question because you've sort of covered everything. So I teach the dual Qigong Fu, and that was I inherited from you and coming through, and that one always resonated with me because it's the many ways skill acquired over time, and it's the expression of self, and it always that was what you that philosophy is what I came up with when Aaron and I were training together, and all the other guys when we were training together and coming up to our black belt. And for me, I remember we'd had a conversation. That philosophy stuck with me, and then you had shifted a little bit for your current school. But I was like, Ed, I this is where I'm staying. You're like, okay, great, go that way. Um, but going into my next thing is an artistic stamp. As I was saying, I've trained with you a lot, and through you, trained with a lot of other people. Jerry Petit being premier among them. And as your assistant instructor, I came with you to a lot of the instructor seminars that Jerry Petit hosted over the years. And I remember during one of those, we were doing something. It was trapping, getting into sort of. He was letting us sort of be creative. All right, here's one, two, three, and then see what happens. And I remember I was working with somebody, and you were working with somebody else right next to me, and I kept getting into like grab by the throat and like want to throw him on the ground. I was like, how to keep getting into this? And you're like, oh, it's because you train with me. And I also recall when I was assisting you and helping you at UCLA, coming back and helping you teach some of the classes throughout those years, and being in the office at UCLA, a lot of people were like, oh, is this your kid brother? And yeah, we kind of look similar, but I think a lot of it had to do with how we were moving. I was around you so much that I was following, and I had such a heavy stamp from you as that's what people were seeing, the similarities, the commonalities of how we moved through space and how we expressed ourselves. And I still catch myself doing, you know, I have various things where I'm like, oh, that's an Edism. Oh, that's a Chadwick. That's a Puck. Oh, that's a Crouton. That's a Pond. Oh, this is a somebody over here. Oh, that's a, and I have those. And so those stamps are on me. And I'm wondering if you can think of anybody off the top of your head in any of the artistic ways that someone has left a stamp on you that you're like, oh yeah, that's a stamp from so and so, that really, whether it's the guitar or the martial arts, and any of the martial arts that you train in, anything that you want to think of or share that you have had as an artistic stamp from one of your mentors.
Well, many times when it comes to the creation of a new piece of art, whatever it may be, music, physical, dance, whatever. A lot of times people will say, there's no such thing as stealing anything because everything's stolen.
Mhm.
It's a reintegration of something that somebody's done somewhere. And we're this wonderful summary of parts, but the way in which we express that, and every once in a while, you'll find your own complete spontaneous creativity that may be completely different than anything that anybody's ever done. But most of the time, we get there because we're guided in some way. And yeah, I've had dozens of them, absolutely, including the martial artists that you mentioned, because when I went looking for people to train with, I wanted to work with the best. And I sought out the best because I'm not an idiot and I can determine what, because I've been around for a long time. I know what works and what doesn't. And um and there's an approach to teaching, an approach to learning that you can begin to identify, which can lead to the query. Can I learn from you? And um, and just the main thing is just opening ourselves so that we're not just knowing that we can learn from anyone at any given point in time, even a beginner. The ego is what typically gets in the way, that distorts our ability to actually take in what's given to us because there's just so much at any given point in time. When we talk about mindfulness-based practices, this is what really encapsulates that experience. It's observation. It's taking it in, but more than just a cold externalized observation, it's really allowing it to enter and then creating with that in some way.
I'm gonna segue because it's just really funny because my next question, and you were talking about like people teaching you, and I have learned a massive amount from you, and I've gotten tons of amazing advice from you. But I remember getting advice from you once. I'd asked for advice as I was about to open up my school, and I was faced with like having to learn all of these names. Since then, I learned ADHD. There's a big problem in there. And I said, Ed, like, how do you remember everybody's name? And you said, you just do. And I thought, that is probably the absolute worst advice you have ever given to me in the entire time that I've known you. But it forced me to figure out my own answer. And I have come up with my own ways to do that and my own cheats to figure out that. And I was going to ask if you had anything where someone you had sought out advice or asked a question and someone gave you something that was completely unhelpful, but then turned into uh, a way for you to find your own path and create your own method to find the answer, I guess. And it kind of goes in with what you were saying before of we take from other people, but there's also that moment where you're just figuring it out for yourself and you're having your own spark. So it's kind of tying in with all those things. I don't know if there's a time when you were like, yeah, I got a terrible piece of advice and I had to figure it out. I don't know if you had one or if that was just me sharing a funny moment.
Oh, yeah, I can absolutely give you one. I've had the wonderful opportunity to seek out enormously learned teachers in the field of Eastern philosophy.
Mhm.
I've worked with numerous Tibetan monks, Taoist priests, um, Zen priests, and studied extensively. Um, a number of years ago, as I was practicing, it's just in my living room, and I was practicing qigong. I'd meditated for about an hour, I think, and then I practiced a long set of qigong. And when I was in the midst of the qigong, I had an awakening is the only way that you could phrase it, where everything dropped away, all sense of self, literally everything became transparent. And it's impossible to articulate the experience. After about what I presume is probably a half hour, I realized that there was an I, an observer, which had come back to the present
Hmm.
moment. And even then, it lasted for several hours. I was by myself, and all I could do was just sit, and I had tears running down my face. I was just in absolute awe of the recognition of the truth of complete and utter unity, of oneness. And after I had kind of staggered through that experience the next day, I called someone that I knew. His name was Andy. Got his book right next to me in this bookcase someplace, but I can't recall exactly what it was. But he was an extremely experienced kung fu practitioner who had spent time at the Shaolin Temple,
Hmm.
and um, and his journey paralleled mine because his my journey a long time ago shifted to the philosophical, where it was I'm not concerned about being a tough guy or who's the toughest guy and
Yeah.
all that stuff, but about how does this ultimately impact consciousness, and how does that impact the people who surround me, and how can that help in some way.
And what did he say?
He said, well, don't try to find it again.
uh,
and and I went, or don't chase it, or something like that, he said. And I mean, that was literally it. I mean, I was trying to stagger through telling him what had just happened. And, he literally had a 2-word answer for me. And, when he said it to me, it sort of bounced off of me, similar to what, when I said to you, bounced off you. And I was like, well, that was a deep comment. Thank you for that. And ultimately, I discovered that he was absolutely right. That is a gift from the universe when it occurs, and that in this practice, yeah, in Zen, you talk about these lightning bolts of awakening that occur. You can't predict them, you can't manipulate them. They just happen, and um, and and the key to that is absolutely not growing attached to the desire to have that experience repeated.
I'm going to share. So I had a similar thing, and for everybody, what I would call what Wet is talking about is enlightenment, and in martial arts, and all the martial arts, and a lot of other artistic, you want to find enlightenment and sort of have that awakening, as you were saying. And I remember having a very similar experience, and I totally out of the blue was having a morning. Elliot was really little at the time, and Catherine was at school. Elliot was at daycare, and I was sitting, sort of doing my morning routine. And just routine of being there and having it. And I had a dumbfounding, like, and just staggered around the house for a couple of hours, just trying to capsulize that into something smaller. And it took me until the next day before I could kind of get it into words. And I remember calling Jerry Petit and saying, "Hey, Sifu, so this is what I had." Like it was like the mother of all aha moments, and everything made sense. And he's like, "Yeah." And then my next question was, "Are there more?" And he said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay, I'm okay with that." And then we lost him shortly after that, and it has been sort of all those things of me getting those little and bigs, just like you said, not looking for them, but just letting them happen and appreciating whatever gift of that moment you get, which is going to then segue me into the next one. Uh, my wife has brain cancer, and that was a huge deal for our family of going through it. And I found uh, a lot of guidance from the artistic side, and my wife has as well. And then you have had arrhythmia, and it's been something has plagued you, and other, we've all had life life things happening. Um, and I wonder if you could share a little bit of you had how you've used, if you could think of something that where that artistic expression helped you cope with and deal with the harshness of living, I guess, with the unexpected, like, oh, that's something I've got to overcome in part of my life. And how does the artist in me help the human deal with that?
Well, that you mentioned the arrhythmia, this condition, atrial fibrillation, that can be um, greater or lesser just depending upon individual circumstance. But mine was really bad. It was where I would just get hammered. It felt like a truck running into my chest, and it was happening a couple of times a week, 24 hours or so. It would go, and it would feel like I was having a heart attack with radiating pain and just inability to concentrate, and couldn't breathe correctly. And I mean, it was really pronounced and very unpleasant.
Mhm.
And it propelled me. I view that as a gift because it propelled me down a path that I desperately needed to go, which was into the softer practice of martial arts. I'd practiced qigong previously,
Mhm.
but for 20 years, this pushed me down a road of exploring very seriously the qigong, acupressure, acupuncture, herbal medicine, and and an even more pronounced and concentrated practice of different forms and practices of meditation.
Mhm.
So um, it forced me down a road that I otherwise probably would not have explored. Go on in, dude.
That's the dog.
That's my dog, Chester.
Ninja Cat has not made an appearance, so he's sleeping somewhere. No appearance by Ninja Cat today.
I got you. There he is. There's Chester. So uh, it was something that while extraordinarily unpleasant and very difficult, um, for a number of reasons, but the most notable of which was, it would stunt my ability to teach.
Mhm.
And um, when you can barely walk, it's pretty hard to, teach martial arts, and it's pretty hard to lecture and, all that stuff. It was tough, man. But
Yeah.
yeah, but it was a gift because it forced me to be absolutely diligent and vigilant about informing myself of this path. So it created a balance, and that's one of the things. Actually, one of the first things that Jerry told me was, "You got power to burn, but the balance is in the soft." And that's one of the first things he said to me.
I think from my perspective of training with him and looking back how he moved and expressed himself before his liver transplant than how he was when we trained with him, was that softness. And
Mhm.
uh, the ferociousness was still there. He wanted to call on it, but it was always surrounded by the softness. Um, which goes into another thing. As a how has being an artist and how has all of this helped you being a father, and then now also being a grandfather? How I find for me that it changes my perspective on my individuality, or even where I came from. It changes and filters through what I want, and then how I want to let my children become themselves, and how I guide them as a parent. And I wonder if you want to share anything that any insight you have as a parent or as a grandparent, as an artist, or as a
Well, I think
person, just in general.
well, I think being an artist yields a sense of sensitivity and an appreciation, a sense of tolerance for other people, other belief sets, um, other experiences. Because, you know, you came from Oklahoma, I came from Kentucky. There's a lot of redneck dumb fucks that are in that world, and
Mhm.
I count myself as being one of them when I was younger, because I was biased and uh, my parents were not prejudiced people, but there's something that you get by growing up in the South that especially pre-busing, which is what happened with me. And yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, in the 70s, the integration began to, sort of a forced integration began to start happening. And I was in that mix in the late 70s or late 60s and early 70s. And um, and there's a horrible, horrible, horrible ignorance that is
Mhm.
typified by lack of awareness. Um, and all it does is generates hate and malice. And I think whatever form of of artistic expression you practice, I don't care if you're scrapbooking, it's something that kind of creates a softer side, a sense of empathy, of care. Yeah, you begin to feel a connection to something and something greater than yourself.
I want to go a little bit further than that, because it's sort of sharing my experience of, limited of teaching, but more of the insight I've gotten from you and from one of my other huge mentors when I was at UCLA, and who you shared an office with, Tom Orth. Being in class as an individual, you sort of think I'm this and this and this and that ego, but then in that world of a classroom setting of cultivating artistic expression, you're shown, or I was shown, I remember seeing it and having it opened up like, here is the beauty of this person. And you look beyond the superficial, and you look beyond, are they male or female? Are they this tall or that tall? What kind of hair do they have? You skip all that stuff and you look to the inside of what they're sharing. And I think there's something beautiful about an artist sharing, and you're in that world and you're cultivating in that world. And I don't think that it's very easy to be in that environment and be around people coming in from everywhere, all over, with all these different walks of life, and opening up themselves and sharing that deeper self. I don't I don't think that you can I don't see how you can stay in there and continue to hold on to the, as you're talking about, the bias and the negativity that we both grew up in those places. It's tough to be like, well, I'm going to hate you because you've just shown me how beautiful you are as a human. And I have to like close that off. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I wonder if you could share a little bit more on that, as someone who's been a professor in that environment for many years now, of seeing student after student from different walks of life come in and share that amazing inner self with the world around, or with everyone in the room.
Well, it's an interesting balance because when the pendulum swings too far either way,
Hmm.
it turns back to essentially itself. So if you look at the fundamental principle of the yin yang, yeah, darkness in its darkest form turns back to light. And the majority of people who are in educational environments are open because they're there to learn.
Hmm.
And um, you have to examine whatever environmental conditioning and bias that may have brought with the package. And it helps because you're in with a bunch of people that are from all over the place and different belief sets, different cultures, different races, religious backgrounds, everything. And you're not going to survive very well unless you develop some sense of tolerance because there are just so many disparate viewpoints.
Hmm.
So you have to learn how to get along a little bit. There is an extreme where it goes to, the furthest left that, we see manifested in the form of, no one should ever be hurt for any reason whatsoever, no matter what. And that's not particularly realistic.
Yeah.
And, you can see that swing, and you can see guys like Jordan Peterson who kind of are a voice of that experience. Um, so again, just kind of a healthy dose of moderation, I think, is reasonable. But yeah, you can see it with people that are. Um, you can just feel ignorance when it comes to you. Yeah,
Yeah.
just that. Just the stupidity and. Uh, and it's difficult to tolerate. That's probably one of the harder things that I have difficulty with is when somebody expresses that form of hatred or disdain for someone else that has that truly ignorant viewpoint
Oh,
and it makes me want to go into combat mode. And one of the things that I grew up Catholic, and as I grew up, I found as I studied Eastern philosophy, I had no problem whatsoever talking to anybody anytime about anything with respect to Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism,
hmm.
and uh, was completely engaged. But yet, when anyone brought up the subject of Christianity, I felt embarrassed almost. And so I set on a course a number of years ago to actually explore that path, but the same way in which I had explored the Eastern traditions. And so I found in studying Jesus's teachings, again, someone to emulate because when faced with opposition like that, with someone who is inherently biased and ignorant, what did he do? He showed love.
And it's
Now,
tough, and I
how?
think that's one of the things also growing up in that world. It's like mine has often been, "Hey, did you actually go read what this Jesus guy was about?" Because you want to claim this one, and it goes for anyone. And I think that positivity, and it's always interesting, and I think a good example of taking it to an extreme of like, oh, we're going to be this, but to the level where you're going to hate someone else, or exclude someone else seems contrary to what the original text, whatever you look at any of the religions that I've also studied, that they're really about. I guess there are some that are like, no, we're going to go kill everybody, but I don't think they really lasted too. Well, there's, I guess, some out there.
Well,
not dominant religions of our society today.
yeah, my point essentially is that um, in emulating someone of note that is an enormously influential person,
Mhm.
teacher, um, how can I model the best possible response? That's what I try to do. I can't do it all the time,
Yeah.
but when that's what I aspire to, and when that's what has taken me down that path. And when you look to what Jesus said is love God and love your neighbor, and that's truly how I try to live my life. And I can think of nothing that helps you to align with that more so than the sensitivity that's cultivated through artistic expression, because you have to have that.
Yeah.
That dumbing down is not something that is uh, inherently useful, I don't think. It's useful when you don't want to feel something,
Yeah.
and that's entirely not the point. Which is why we have to in order to build empathy and kindness and compassion for other people.
What is something you'd like to share as someone who has walked many paths as an artist, and many years as an artist? What's something you'd like to share, your insight, in sort of a closing remark to the artists out there who are watching this?
Oh, it's don't give up on the form of expression. Whatever it is, you have to look into your heart and really recognize what is connecting for you. And one of the most pivotal questions is, are you doing this for yourself and for your own need to communicate and to express in this way creatively? Or are you doing it for external approval? Because when it comes down to many, 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 I mean, you were here in LA,
Yeah.
so many people choose a form of artistic expression, music, acting, whatever the case may be, because of the purported approval that they would like to receive from the unidentified masses out there. And do you need that to validate who you are? You don't. You just don't. And recognizing that that is a mechanism that drives behavior, that is so important. Because I tell kids that want to be actors, you have to, in your soul, have to need to express yourself that way. And there are people who need that just they can't do anything else because they just have to express themselves that way. And with music and with whatever, with painting, with artists, they've got to, it's just how they've got to get out what's inside them. And that's the path they need to follow. But if you're doing it because you want approval, if you're doing it because you want a bunch of money, it's going to fall short. It absolutely will. And I know people who have done it and been successful, and they achieved all that stuff. And they were still completely unfulfilled internally because they weren't following their real true path. All the junk in the world that you accumulate, and all the praise that may be lauded onto someone, that can become a curse. Yeah, and you can see that repeated over and over again.
Everyone, I think that is super, super amazing insight from Ed Monahan, professor UCLA, Sifu, my Sifu mentor for a long time, and just an artist walking through life and always happy to share great insight from his own personal journey, and I hope you gained a whole lot from this, because I sure did, and I've known the man for like 25 years, so there's a lot in there. And just again, Ed, thank you so much for being on.
My pleasure.